In 2017, a woman vanished. A burned car, human remains, a grieving husband, a closed case. But 3 years later, she was found very much alive. The story begins in rural Mississippi, where a burned-out vehicle was discovered. Its charred remains a haunting sight. Inside, investigators found human remains, a tragic end to a life. The grieving husband, Antonio Dillard, was left to pick up the pieces. His world turned upside down. The case was closed, the mystery seemingly solved. But appearances, as they say, can be deceiving. Fast forward to 2020, and the story takes a shocking turn. Tisha Dillard, the woman presumed dead, was found very much alive, dancing in a studio far from home. How could this be? How did she manage to fake her own death, and why? The questions pile up, each one more intriguing than the last. Before we continue with this twisted tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We would love to know how wide our videos get. So, who was in the car? And why did Tisha fake her own death? These are the mysteries we'll unravel as we delve into the twisted tale of Tisha Dillard, a woman whose life was anything but ordinary. From the courtroom sketches to the mugshot that changed everything, we'll explore the layers of deception and the shocking truth behind a woman who staged her own disappearance. Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind the lies. In the heart of Jackson, Mississippi, lived a woman whose life seemed like a page straight out of an ordinary tale. Tisha Dillard was 34 years old, a nurse by profession and a mother by heart. She was the kind of woman who woke up early, her days filled with the routine of helping others, her nights spent with her family. Her life, on the surface, was stable, predictable even. She was hardworking, the kind of person who always had a smile ready for those around her. Her husband, Antonio, was her rock. They had built a life together, a life that included their daughter, Serenity. Serenity was the joy of their lives, a little girl whose laughter could light up even the darkest of days. Tisha and Antonio, they were a team, a partnership that seemed unshakable. Their home was a place of warmth, a sanctuary where love and family were the cornerstones. But in July 2017, everything changed. Tisha was reported missing. The news sent shockwaves through their small community. The woman who had been a constant presence in so many lives was suddenly gone, vanished without a trace. Antonio was left standing in the midst of a storm he hadn't seen coming. The house that had once been filled with laughter and warmth now echoed with silence. Serenity's questions hung in the air, unanswered. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The search for Tisha became a relentless pursuit of answers. Antonio's heart ached with every passing day, the hope of finding her fading but never completely gone. The community rallied around them, offering support and prayers, but the void left by Tisha's absence was profound. And so, the story of Tisha Dillard began its descent into mystery. A woman who had been so much a part of the fabric of their lives was now a ghost. Her presence felt in every empty space. The questions piled up, each one more haunting than the last. Where had she gone? What had happened to her? And why, oh why, had she left without a word? The introduction to this case is not just about a woman who disappeared. It's about a family torn apart, a community left in shock, and a mystery that would unravel over years, revealing layers of deception and truth that no one could have anticipated.
The investigation into Tisha Dillard's disappearance began with a discovery that would set the tone for the entire case. On a quiet stretch of Old Yazoo Road in Hinds County, Mississippi, police found Tisha's charred vehicle. The scene was one of devastation, the car almost unrecognizable from the fire that had ravaged it. Inside, investigators discovered human remains, badly burned beyond recognition. The fire had been fierce, leaving little to go on for a conclusive identification. Despite the extensive damage, authorities made assumptions based on the circumstances. Tisha had been reported missing, and her car was found in a remote area. The remains were assumed to be hers, and with no other leads, the investigation moved forward under this assumption. The authorities ruled Tisha dead, and a death certificate was issued. It was a tragic end to a life that had been so full of promise. But as the investigation continued, questions began to surface. How had the fire started? Why had Tisha's car been found in such a remote location? And most importantly, was the assumption about the remains correct? These questions would haunt the investigators as they delved deeper into the case, searching for answers that seemed to be buried under layers of uncertainty. The initial findings painted a picture of a tragic accident, but the more the investigators looked, the more they found inconsistencies. The fire damage was extensive, but there were no signs of a collision or any other external factors that could have caused the accident. The tires were intact, and there were no skid marks on the road. It was as if the car had simply caught fire while driving. As the investigation progressed, the focus shifted to the remains found inside the car. The fire had been so intense that visual identification was impossible. DNA analysis was requested, but the results were inconclusive due to the extensive damage. The authorities were left with no choice but to rely on the circumstantial evidence and declare Tisha dead. But the story didn't end there. The investigation would take unexpected turns, revealing layers of deception and hidden truths. The initial assumption about the remains would be challenged, and the case would take a shocking twist years later. The journey to uncover the truth about Tisha Dillard's disappearance was just beginning, and it would lead investigators down a path filled with more questions than answers. In the wake of Tisha's disappearance, Antonio found himself in a world that felt both familiar and unrecognizable. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, as he grappled with the reality of his new life. The memorial service for Tisha was a somber affair, filled with friends and family who had come together to mourn the loss of a woman who had touched so many lives. Antonio stood before them, his voice steady but his eyes filled with a sadness that words could never fully express. He spoke of Tisha's kindness, her warmth, and the love she had for their daughter, Serenity. It was a tribute to a woman who had left an indelible mark on their lives, even in her absence. The life insurance payout of $250,000 came as a shock to Antonio. It was a sum that seemed almost surreal, a stark reminder of the life he had lost. The money was intended to provide for his future, but it felt like a hollow victory. Antonio used a portion of the payout to settle the remaining mortgage on their home. Another portion went toward legal fees and mental health services for Serenity, and approximately $50,000 was placed in a custodial 529 savings plan for her future college expenses. Financial records from this period show no unusual activity, and investigators would later confirm that none of the transactions raised suspicion during subsequent audits. In 2018, Antonio made the difficult decision to relocate to Houston, Texas, with Serenity. It was a move born out of necessity, a fresh start for both of them. The city was a stark contrast to the quiet streets of Jackson, but it offered a sense of anonymity and a chance to rebuild. Antonio found work at a commercial auto repair facility located in the western suburbs near the Katy Freeway. His employment was verified through HR records, and neighbors in the apartment complex where they initially moved described Antonio as quiet and private, rarely seen outside of work hours except when taking his daughter to and from school or local parks. Serenity's transition was not easy. She had turned 9 shortly before her mother's disappearance, and the loss had left a deep wound. She was placed under the care of a licensed trauma counselor specializing in child grief recovery. The sessions began less than 2 weeks after the funeral and continued on a weekly basis through the fall. School officials at McWillie Elementary, where Serenity was enrolled, were notified and given clearance to coordinate with a therapist as needed. The tone of the gathering was quiet and restrained. The couple's daughter, Serenity Dillard, who had turned 9 shortly before her mother's disappearance, was placed under the care of a licensed trauma counselor specializing in child grief recovery. The sessions began less than 2 weeks after the funeral and continued on a weekly basis through the fall. School officials at McWillie Elementary, where Serenity was enrolled, were notified and given clearance to coordinate with a therapist as needed. Antonio's life in Houston was marked by a quiet determination. He worked hard, providing for his daughter and trying to create a sense of normalcy in their new home. But the memories of Tisha were never far away. In a brief televised statement recorded outside the courthouse, Antonio said, "I buried someone they told me was my wife." The statement was simple, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. It was a reflection of a man who had lost more than just a loved one. He had lost a part of himself. As the years passed, Antonio and Serenity found their footing in their new city. They built a life together, filled with new experiences and a sense of hope. But the mystery of Tisha's disappearance remained, a shadow that lingered in the background. The questions that had haunted Antonio since that fateful day in 2017 were still unanswered. And as the story of Tisha Dillard continued to unfold, Antonio would find himself at the center of a mystery that was far from over. In the quiet of 2020, a shocking twist began to unfold. It started with a friend, scrolling through social media, when a familiar face caught their eye. There she was, a woman who looked strikingly like Tisha Dillard, dancing gracefully in a studio in New Orleans, Louisiana. But this woman wasn't Tisha Dillard. She was Kesha Green. The name was different, but the resemblance was uncanny. The friend's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could Tisha, the woman everyone believed to be dead, be alive and living under a false identity? The friend reached out to Antonio, and soon, a private investigator was hired. The investigator, a seasoned professional with a keen eye for detail, began to dig. He followed leads, gathered evidence, and pieced together the puzzle. The investigation took him to New Orleans, where he discovered that Kesha Green was indeed Tisha Dillard. The fingerprints matched, confirming what Antonio had dared to hope but never fully believed. Tisha was alive. The news hit Antonio like a bolt of lightning. The woman he had mourned, the mother of his child, was alive and had been living a double life. The shock was overwhelming, but it was also a call to action. Antonio knew he had to bring Tisha to justice, not just for himself, but for their daughter, Serenity, who deserved to know the truth. The investigator's work was meticulous and thorough. He gathered evidence, documented Tisha's activities, and built a case that was impossible to ignore. The authorities were informed, and a warrant was issued. The arrest was swift and precise. Tisha Dillard, alias Kesha Green, was taken into custody, her life of deception finally exposed. As Tisha was led away in handcuffs, the reality of the situation began to sink in. The woman who had staged her own death, who had left her family and friends in mourning, was now facing the consequences of her actions. The questions that had haunted Antonio for years were finally being answered. But the journey was far from over. The truth about Tisha's disappearance and the reasons behind her elaborate deception were still waiting to be uncovered. The discovery in New Orleans was a turning point, a moment that changed everything. It was a reminder that sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered by those who refuse to give up. As the investigation continued, Antonio and Serenity found themselves at the center of a story that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the truth, no matter how buried, would always find its way to the surface. As the dust settled on Tisha Dillard's arrest, investigators began to peel back the layers of her elaborate deception. What they uncovered was a web of financial troubles and desperation that painted a far different picture of the woman everyone thought they knew. Tisha had been living a life that, on the surface, seemed perfect. But beneath that surface, there were cracks. Foreclosure notices had been piling up, and her credit card debt had spiraled out of control. The woman who had once been a pillar of stability was, in reality, drowning in financial quicksand. The pressure had been building, and Tisha had been searching for a way out. The motive became clear: escape the debt that was suffocating her and secure the insurance money that would give her a fresh start. It was a plan that was as dangerous as it was desperate, but Tisha was willing to take the risk. And she wasn't alone in her scheme. Enter Maurice Shepard, a man with a criminal history that included convictions for insurance fraud and document forgery. Shepard was the kind of person who knew how to navigate the shadows, how to make the impossible seem possible. It was believed that he had helped Tisha stage her death, using his knowledge of the criminal underworld to create a scenario that would look like a tragic accident. The burned car was no accident. It was a meticulously planned part of Tisha's escape. The fire had been set to destroy evidence, to make it impossible to identify the remains inside. And those remains, they weren't Tisha's. The investigators discovered that an unidentified body had been used, a chilling detail that added another layer to the already complex case. As the investigation continued, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The fingerprints, the surveillance footage, the financial records, all pointed to a woman who had gone to extreme lengths to disappear. Tisha Dillard had orchestrated her own death, using the help of an accomplice and a carefully crafted plan. But why? What had driven her to such drastic measures? The answer lay in the financial troubles that had been building for years. The pressure of mounting debt, the fear of losing everything. These were the forces that had pushed Tisha to the edge. And in her desperation, she had chosen a path that would have devastating consequences for those she left behind. The story of Tisha Dillard and her accomplice, Maurice Shepard, is a stark reminder of the lengths some people will go to escape their problems. It's a tale of deception, betrayal, and the search for truth. As the investigation continued, more questions were raised than answered. Who was the unidentified body in the car? How had Tisha and Maurice managed to pull off such a daring scheme? And what would be the final outcome for those involved? The journey to uncover the truth was far from over. As the layers of Tisha's deception were peeled back, the story became more complex, more intriguing. The motive had been exposed, but the mystery was far from solved. The courtroom was a place of high stakes and raw emotions as the legal fallout from Tisha Dillard's elaborate deception began to unfold. Tisha faced a litany of charges that painted a clear picture of her actions: fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Each charge was a testament to the lengths she had gone to in order to escape her financial troubles and start anew. Maurice Shepard, Tisha's accomplice, chose a different path. He pleaded guilty to his role in the scheme, accepting responsibility for his part in the fraud. His decision to cooperate with the prosecution earned him a sentence of 11 years in federal prison. It was a heavy punishment, but one that reflected the severity of his crimes. Throughout the trial, Antonio Dillard sat in the courtroom, his presence a silent but powerful reminder of the impact Tisha's actions had on their family. The emotional weight of the proceedings was palpable, with moments of tension and moments of relief. The courtroom was a place where the truth was laid bare, where the consequences of Tisha's choices were felt in every word spoken. Antonio, who had been cleared of any involvement in the deception, found himself in a unique position. He was both a victim of Tisha's actions and a key witness in the case against her. His testimony was crucial, providing the prosecution with insights into Tisha's state of mind and the dynamics of their relationship. It was a difficult role, one that required him to relive the pain and confusion of the past few years. The trial was filled with emotional reactions, moments that captured the complexity of the situation. There were tears, there were moments of anger, and there were moments of quiet reflection. Key quotes from the trial stood out, words that encapsulated the essence of the case. Tisha's own statements, her attempts to explain her actions, were met with a mix of sympathy and condemnation. It was a trial that highlighted the human cost of deception and the search for justice. In the midst of the legal proceedings, the impact on Serenity, Tisha and Antonio's daughter, could not be ignored. The custody arrangements and the psychological impact of her mother's actions were handled with care, ensuring that Serenity's well-being was a priority. The court recognized the trauma she had experienced and took steps to provide her with the support she needed to heal. As the trial came to a close, the courtroom was filled with a sense of finality. The verdict was read, and Tisha was sentenced to a significant amount of time in prison. It was a moment that brought a measure of closure to Antonio and Serenity, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The legal fallout from Tisha's actions would continue to reverberate through their lives, but with the truth now out in the open, they could begin to move forward. The story of Tisha Dillard's deception and the subsequent trial is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the pursuit of justice. It's a story that highlights the complexities of relationships, the impact of financial desperation, and the importance of truth. As the dust settled on the courtroom proceedings, the lives of those affected by Tisha's actions began to find a new sense of normalcy, a normalcy built on the foundation of honesty and the hope for a better future. As the dust settled on Tisha Dillard's shocking revelation and subsequent arrest, one mystery remained stubbornly unsolved: the identity of the body found in the burned car. Despite the extensive investigation and the uncovering of Tisha's elaborate deception, the remains discovered in that charred vehicle remained a haunting enigma. Listed officially as Jane Doe 61 to 2017, the unidentified woman had become a central yet elusive figure in the case. The authorities had conducted DNA testing, hoping to find a match that would finally put a name to the faceless victim. But the results had been inconclusive, leaving the investigators with more questions than answers. Theories began to circulate, each one more intriguing than the last. Some suggested that the woman might have been a transient, possibly homeless, who had frequented the Metro Center bus terminal in Jackson. Her presence in the area around the time of the incident raised the possibility that she had been chosen for her anonymity, a tragic pawn in Tisha's desperate plan. Another theory posited that the woman could have been the victim of a separate crime, her body used to stage Tisha's fake death. This idea added a layer of complexity to the case, suggesting that there might be more to the story than initially met the eye. The authorities, determined to uncover the truth, continued to seek leads, hoping that someone, somewhere, might hold the key to identifying Jane Doe 61 to 2017. The mystery of the unidentified body cast a long shadow over the case, a reminder that even with Tisha's arrest, there were still loose ends to be tied. The investigators, driven by a sense of duty and a desire for closure, pursued every possible avenue. They interviewed witnesses, reviewed old missing persons reports, and combed through databases, all in the hope of finding a match. As the investigation continued, the community of Jackson found itself grappling with the unsettling reality that a life had been lost, and that life remained nameless. The case of Jane Doe 61 to 2017 became a symbol of the unknown, a testament to the complexities of human existence and the sometimes tragic intersections of fate. As the final pieces of this harrowing tale fall into place, we're left with a question that echoes through the corridors of justice and the recesses of our minds. Tisha Dillard didn't just vanish into the night. She meticulously orchestrated an escape, a daring bid for freedom from the shackles of debt and despair. But in doing so, she left behind a trail of broken hearts and unanswered questions. The cost of her escape was steep, measured not just in dollars, but in the lives she left in turmoil. Reflecting on the case, the lead investigator's words resonate with a somber clarity. "We closed a case that never should have been closed," he says, his voice carrying the weight of hindsight and the relentless pursuit of justice. It's a statement that underscores the complexity of the human experience, where actions have consequences, and the search for answers can sometimes lead us to uncomfortable truths. As we draw this story to a close, we're reminded that the world is full of mysteries, some of which may never be fully unraveled. Tisha Dillard's tale is one of them, a story that will linger in the minds of those who followed her journey from disappearance to revelation. It's a narrative that challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question what we think we know, and to never underestimate the lengths to which people will go to protect their secrets. So, as you leave this story behind and step back into your own lives, we invite you to stay curious, to keep asking questions, and to join us for more stories that peel back the layers of the unknown. Because in the end, it's the pursuit of truth that drives us, the quest for answers that keeps us going, and the stories of real people that make us human. Subscribe, like, and follow for more true crime stories.